Hello everyone, thank you for clicking on this video. If you watched my last video, you will know that I am a biologist and I have previously done a couple of behavioral studies on zoo animals. And I would love to make a couple of videos where I talk about these studies, but I thought it would be a good idea to start with a video where I kind of like talk about what a behavioral study is and kind of like how they are made, and a little bit about like why do we do behavioral studies, like what do we use them for. So that's what this video is. So I hope that you enjoy it. So a behavioral study, it is a study of animal behavior. It's kind of in the name. But basically, you observe animals for a certain purpose. So it can either be wild animals, it can be captive animals. It kind of depends what you want to get out of the study. If, for example, you're observing wild animals, it could be because you want to learn more about the animal's natural behavior, just to see like how are they in the wild, maybe versus in captivity. If you want to study captive animals, there are loads of different like reasons for it. It could be like, you know, in general their welfare. Maybe there are certain behaviors you want to observe to see, like stress behaviors. Maybe if the animal has shown signs of pain or discomfort, you want to like observe it to see how often, in which situations, stuff like that. The goal of behavioral studies and why they are typically done is, well, to learn more about animals and more about their behavior. Especially when it comes to captive animals, it's about improving animal welfare, which is why I personally like them. So that's a little bit of an overview of what a behavioral study is and why we do them. Now, let's get into how we do them. Now, I have only done behavioral studies on captive animals at a zoo, so I don't know fully how you would do it with wild animals. I'm assuming it's somewhat similar, but I'm gonna mostly be talking about how they're done with captive animals, just so you're aware. You need an aim, you need a goal, you need to figure out, what do I want to get out of this study? What is my aim with it? So am I trying to just see the general welfare of these animals? Am I looking for a certain behavior? You know, it could be a lot of things that you want to look for. So it's all about figuring out, why am I doing this study and what do I want to get out of it? So, you know, it could be a lot of things. Maybe you're observing a whole, like if there are multiple animals in the enclosure, maybe you're observing all of them, maybe you're just observing one of them. Maybe you're trying to figure out different types of enrichment to see which types do they like the most, which types do they not like so much. It could obviously be, you know, you looking at like, are they showing signs of stress? Because there are certain behaviors out there that are, you know, stress related, so you can be looking at them. You kind of just need to start by figuring out, what do I want to get out of this study? Typically, when you do a behavioral study, you kind of already have a goal when you decide to do the study, because you don't just pick out an animal and say, I want to study that. I don't know why, but I just do. so you kind of need to figure out like, why am I doing this? What do I want to get out of it? And especially when it comes to like zoo animals, you are typically working together with the caretakers of the animals. So a lot of the time it could also be the caretakers that kind of have some ideas, because they obviously see the animals every single day, but they aren't there to observe them all day because they have other things to do as well. So they may have noticed something, a certain behavior or whatever it could be, and then they want you to maybe figure out what's going on. So it could be a lot of things. 2. You need to make something that is called an ethogram. An ethogram is basically a list of the behaviors you want to observe. So I will pop one up on screen here that I have used in one of my studies, just so you can see what it looks like. It's not really that complicated, it's just a list of behaviors, but you know. So basically, these behaviors obviously have to be relevant to the animals that you're studying. So for example, if you're studying a fish, it wouldn't make sense to have walking as a behavior, you know? Kind of like, you need to just make sure that it's targeted the animal in particular. Secondly, you need to make sure that this ethogram is relevant to your aim. So if, for example, I'm just giving a basic example here. This is probably not a study that's been done, but it's just so you understand. So let's say you want to see how much this animal sleeps. Then it really only makes sense for you to have 2 behaviors on it, which is sleeping and awake. Otherwise, you don't really need all the other stuff. So you need to make sure that your ethogram is, you know, made so that it fits the animals and your aim. So that's kind of the whole point of making these ethograms, just so you have something to go off of. Now that you have your aim, you have your ethogram, you need to plan how you're going to do this study. So you need to do your observations, of course, of the animals, so you can actually have some data. Now, how do we do these observations? Usually, you will film the animals in their enclosures, so you will maybe put up cameras that are filming the enclosures as much as possible. Or maybe the zoo already has cameras in the enclosures and you can gain access to that footage. Just kind of depends on the situation. I kind of have experienced both of those options. I will say, if you put up your own cameras and they are in reach of the visitors at the zoo, just beware that the zoo guests will tamper with your cameras. Because that happened to us. We experienced it kind of a lot. People would either accidentally like move the cameras or whatever, knock them down. We actually also experienced people who thought it was funny to put their head in front of the camera, or someone actually put their phone in front of the camera for some reason. I don't really understand that, but yeah. So just beware, that can happen. Now, if you have the cameras that are already in the enclosures that the zookeepers use, well, then at the very least, the public can't touch these cameras. However, there might be a chance that these cameras aren't showing the entire enclosure because maybe they're just showing parts that are relevant to the caretakers. So it's a whole lot, but you need to somehow figure out how you're going to observe these animals, and it's a lot easier to do when you're recording them, because in a recording you can fast forward if necessary. Because if you're just sitting there observing them all day, it probably would be a very tedious process, which it kind of already is. So we don't need to make it any more tedious. So once you have planned it, you have executed it, you've put the cameras up, and you've recorded it, you of course also need to like figure out how long am I going to be observing these animals. It's going to be weeks, months. How long are we going to do this for? It obviously needs to be relevant for your study. Of course, the longer you're observing the animals, the more specific your data will be. Like, the more data points you have, the more precise they will be. But obviously, it takes a lot of time, so you need to have time to actually go through the data once you have it. In step 4, you need to go through all of your recordings and note down the behavior. Now, this step is definitely the most, I don't want to say boring, but it takes a long time. So you need to sit down and look at these recordings, and typically you're observing the animals for hours in the same day, right? So you need to sit down. You will have an Excel sheet. I can see if I can find one from my previous studies and just pop it up on screen so you can see what it looks like. Basically, you have all the behaviors listed on the side, and then on the top you will have the time of the day in hours, minutes, and seconds, because you need to note the behaviors down in seconds. So whenever the animal starts a behavior, you write that it started, and then, you know, in that specific time, in that second, and then you keep going until they end the behavior, and then you note that now it's ended, and in that same second you need to write what other behaviors started. So it takes a long time. There are obviously some behaviors that you can fast forward through. If they're sleeping, for example, a lot of that time you can just fast forward. But there are definitely also behaviors that you can't fast forward through. And I will say, the animals that I have observed, the first animals I observed were tigers, and there was a lot of it we could kind of fast forward through. Like, tigers or cats sleep a lot, so, you know, there was a lot of sleeping. Now, the other animals that I observed were orangutans. Now, orangutans don't necessarily sleep as much. Also, they have hands, so they are often doing little things with their hands, and a lot of times it's a new behavior. So that was a lot more time consuming than observing the tigers. So also be aware of that. In step 5, you are analyzing your data. So now you have this whole Excel sheet of each day you've observed, of all the hours, of all the behaviors you've noted down, and you need to now get something out of it. So you will need to use a statistical software. The one I am used to using is called R. Actually, it's the R Studio version that I've used. And I liked it, I thought it was good, but there are multiple different softwares, so you can choose whichever one you like. In this, you need to make some statistics. You need to figure out, like, what are these behaviors showing? Like, for example, if you're doing multiple individuals, you can compare them to each other. Be like, is this individual showing more signs of stress than this one? The way you do that is you calculate what is called a p-value. Now, a p-value kind of shows how significant a result is. So it will show this result is very significant. That means it differs significantly from the other results. So that's kind of a way of comparing things. I remember in the first study I did, we also did some bar graphs because it was multiple individuals, so we were kind of like comparing them side by side. How much of each behavior did we observe? All of that. You now have all of your data, you have analyzed it, what do we do now? Well, you need to write it all down. So a lot of time behavioral studies, obviously, they become a scientific article. So you need to have written this article where you need to have a little introduction about the animals you're observing, why you're observing them, stuff like that. You need to have your aim written down, and then you need to have your results and all that kind of stuff. And then at the end, you need to have a little bit of a discussion about your results. So typically you would compare your results to results from other studies that have studied either the same animals or similar animals, kind of depending on what makes the most sense and how many relevant studies there are. So you need to reflect on your data and compare it to other people's data just to see what can we see here? What did we get out of this? Did we get what we wanted to get out of it? What can we use it for? So for example, if you wanted to see different types of enrichment, what the animals were most interested in, well, you should be able to see that from your data. Which types of enrichment did they interact with more than others? That way you can kind of see, and then you can compare that to other studies that have maybe done the same things, and you can see, did I find the same as they did? Because maybe these animals are different. And then maybe we need to do more studies using more types of enrichment or something like that. You will never be able to say, this is the truth, this is exactly how this specific species of animal acts, because you're just looking at one or a few individuals in a certain situation. They are not, not all captive animals are in the same types of habitats, enclosures, so their enclosure also has a lot to do with their behavior. So what you can say with your study is, this is how these specific animals in this specific situation act. And then other people can use that to observe other animals. So it's not like it's a concrete thing, this is just how it is. It's more of this is what we experienced. Now, of course, if your study was aimed at figuring out maybe a certain animal was showing signs of being sick or being sad or whatever, and your goal was to figure out, is this true? Can we see what's wrong with it? Then obviously you might have something a little more concrete, because then it's only focusing on that one specific individual and not the species in general. Obviously you can also, if it's stress behaviors you're looking for, you can also use it to see, is this enclosure they're in right now, is this good enough? Or are they showing signs of stress? Do we need to change something? That, of course, also can be a bit more concrete. But if you want to say something specifically about this general species of animal, you won't have something concrete, if you get what I mean. So it's all about just observing them, seeing what you can figure out, and don't be distraught if you don't get the result you thought you were gonna get, because oftentimes you won't. It's just, that's the joys of science. Sorry. I personally think behavioral studies are really fascinating. I think they are a great thing, and I love that, zoos are kind of becoming more and more open to researchers coming in and doing studies on their animals, because it kind of shows that they care about their animals and they care about their welfare. Because zoos have previously had a reputation of not keeping their animals in very good conditions. I know it varies from country to country. There are definitely some countries nowadays that still have questionable living conditions for their zoo animals, but I digress. However, I think it's really awesome that there are more and more zoos out there that are working with researchers to help their animals and give them as good of a life as possible. Because we have taken these animals from the wild and we've put them in captivity for our enjoyment. So we better make sure that these animals live lives that are as good as we can possibly give them. So that was kind of what I wanted to say, what I wanted to talk about. If you have any questions, let me know. I hope I covered all of it, but my next videos should hopefully be about the specific studies that I have done. So I hope to see you there.